afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Happy to be talking to some young people. I teach at UG, so I talk to young people quite often. But it's always good to have a bigger audience, a varied audience to have some discussions with. I'm going to share a few thoughts on youth leadership, and I was asked to do so from a historical perspective. History is a great teacher, if we pay attention, and unfortunately most times we don't. And so today I'm going to briefly highlight for you a few facts about some very notable Guyanese leaders. And I will try to extract some of the core values that they all possessed, some of the ideas that they all articulated, and some of the directions in which they attempted to go. Youths have actually always been at the forefront of change in terms of Guyanese history. This is not accidental, and it's largely because youth is the period when you're daring, you're innovative, you're questioning, you're wondering. And so the question is, what are the youths doing today in this political, social, economic dispensation? Now, to briefly highlight some leaders, I was given 5 minutes. I'm really going to try my best. I like to talk, so I'm going to try my best to stick as far as possible to about 7. All right, so Charlie Jagan. Clearly, we all know who he is. But do we know that at 29, he was elected to the Legislative Council of Guyana, meaning the National Assembly? Elected. He ran for office and he was elected. Do we know that at 28, he co-founded the Political Affairs Committee? This was a body that was tasked with going about the country and essentially popularizing ideas, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist ideas. Do we know that at 32, he spearheaded the formation of the PPP, now the party in government, and he became premier at the age of 35. Forbes Burnham, another notable Guyanese leader. Do we know that he co-founded the PPP at age 27? He was elected to the Georgetown City Council at age 29. And at age 30, he was elected to the Legislative Council and became the Minister of Education for the country. Walter Rodney. At 24, he was an activist and scholar. At 26, his activism was so great in the country of Jamaica that he was declared persona non grata, and he was banned from ever returning to Jamaica because of his advocacy for the working poor. He was active in Guyanese politics by age 32, and of course we know, due to the Walter Rodney Commission of Inquiry, he was dead by age 38. UC Guyana. At age 28, he was a cabinet minister responsible for public works, and if you look at the historical records, he was in fact at that age the most feared politician by the British Colonial Office. Janet Jagan, at age 26, she founded the Women's Political and Economic Organization and co-founded the Political Affairs Committee. At age 27, she ran for a seat in the Legislative Council in 1947 and she lost. But at age 30, she was elected to the Georgetown City Council, and at age 33, she was elected to the National Legislature and became Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. Moving slightly away from politics, though not, we turn to Hubert Nathaniel Critchlow, arguably father of trade union in Guyana and arguably in the Caribbean. He started his activism at age 19 as a dock worker, having left school, having left primary school and never attended secondary. The strike failed, but he didn't stop there. In 1906, he went on strike again and succeeded. He was fired from his job for his activism. Notwithstanding these setbacks, Critchlow went on to establish the first trade union in the West Indies, went on to become a member of the legislature and a giant in the Caribbean labor movement. Now, what did all of these individuals, just a few that I've highlighted, have in common? What made them so engaged in their society? What made them have the desire to serve? Why were they so politically ambitious? I want to suggest, first and foremost, they had a social conscience. They had empathy. They entered into the ranks of the middle class, the professional class, but they remained concerned about people from whom they came. They were disturbed by what they were seeing. suffering, brutality meted out to people, the masses. They knew the Guyanese people deserved better, and they were determined to play a role in realizing this. Their aim was not solely to use their education and training for self-advancement. I'm not suggesting that they were altruistic altogether. Clearly they had ambitions. But it was not solely about their ambition, but they also worked for the advancement of their community. Many of them rejected trappings of wealth and privilege, lived very frugally until they died. And so, with that perspective, they couldn't be compromised ethically. Secondly, they all had an ideological, philosophical view about life. They were anti-imperialists, anti-colonialists, socialists in orientation. No one is suggesting that we go in that direction. I'm telling you, they had a philosophy that guided their operation and their movement. Even though I must confess I am socialist in orientation. They understood the dynamics of the global economy and the role of Guyana as a developing country within it. They knew that local capitalist forces were collaborating with foreign capitalist forces to maintain an economic stranglehold over the economy. In other words, they saw the connection between politics and economics. And they knew that historically, political institutions were used to serve the interests of the elites. And so if you wanted to serve the interests of the masses, you need to gain access to and ultimately control those political institutions so that you could advance their interests. Very importantly, they read voraciously. They were men who were intellectuals of no mean order. And this was not simply connected to their schooling. In my opinion, the greatest quote-unquote servant leader that Guyana has ever had is Guyana. He never went beyond secondary school. But out of all of them, in terms of his intellectual output and writings, he's only surpassed by Walter Rodney. And so, it's not connected to schooling, it's connected to your appetite in terms of learning. They studied the system they wanted to lead. They made themselves experts on how the government system works. How citizens could get access to government services. They understood the functions of government, the structures of governments, and how they interrelated and connected to each other. In addition to studying the system, they also studied their societies. They paid their dues. Many of them served at the village levels where nobody ever heard about them. They interacted with people, advocated for people where no one ever knew and or heard that they were actually working. Many of them served in local government, city council levels, and then went on to the national platforms. In other words, they were involved in both grassroots politics and elite politics, often simultaneously. When I say grassroots politics, meaning they were involved in mass mobilization, talking to people on the ground, and elite politics, they were involved in National Assembly, they were involved in cabinet, making government decisions. They also engaged each other and other intellectuals from within the community and outside of Guyana. And they educated people within the community, and that cross-linkage, both internally and externally, is very important because, of course, you keep yourself continually refreshed and you get exposed to new ideas. They produced and distributed in their 20s the most feared bulletin in the late 1940s that was actually banned coming out of the piece. They held bottom house discussions, linking the depressed conditions in the colony to colonialism very persuasively to the point that they became very feared. They were bold enough to import literature that was banned and that was deemed subversive. They were willing to challenge authority. They had the courage of conviction, and they were bold enough to call it as they saw it. Now, activism had a price, and activism always has a price. They were arrested, they were imprisoned, they were beaten, they were sentenced, they were under surveillance. And of course, we know Walter Rodney paid the ultimate price in terms of death. These young leaders displayed a willingness to be imprisoned, to be arrested, and if necessary, though of course they would hope not, die for their convictions. They were not always successful. They lost elections. They were thrown out of office. They were criticized. They were prosecuted, yet they persisted. And the lesson is, when you have a conviction that is based upon a principled stand, what you do is if you stand strong, you be persistent, and history will ultimately vindicate you. And finally, they were defined by a spirit of resistance. Resistance to exploitation, resistance to marginalization, resistance to brutalization, emanating from the powers that be. Now, this spirit of resistance wasn't new. It's characteristic of the Guyanese society going all the way back to the indigenous Indians, who resisted continuous enslavement by European colonizers, to the Africans who continually resisted in violent and non-violent ways to the institutions of slavery, and incidentally resisted in terms of purchasing large plantations, which they then created a village movement. We're going to talk about the local government structure in Guyana, and in fact, the African village movement created the backbone for the local government structure that ultimately emerged. They created their own structures, and it was part of these structures that were then used to build the local government structures that we now know today. The spirit of resistance was seen in the indentured system, the Eastern indentured workers who continually fought, quote unquote, for their rights. The cost of indentureship was high in terms of fighting for rights. There was all disturbances in 1913, 14 people died. Rumvelt riots in 1924, 13 people died. 4 died in Leonora in 1939, 5 died in Edmore, and I'm not talking about the smaller number, it's 1 or 2 that would have died in different resistance movements. Having said all of that, I'll close and give you my conclusion. Can the Guyanese society experience positive change without integral youth involvement? I would want to suggest to you that history suggests